My name is Joe Biden. I am Jill Biden's husband. That's how I am appropriately known in Washington and around the world, and I am proud of it. Mr. President, thank you very, very much for the hospitality. The President was reminding me the last time we saw one another was back in the days when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee and he was dean of Columbia Law School. He migrated south into a great, great university, and now I got to call him Mr. President, I tell you. Mr. Ambassador Tudor, thank you, and Secretary Baker, thank you for hosting us here today. And thanks to MD Anderson, I think probably the greatest cancer research hospital in the world. And Jill and I spent a lot of time at MD Anderson. Time, quite frankly, we wish we never had to spend, but time that allowed us to get to know a group of absolutely incredible people. But before I move on, let me say a word about Jim Baker. He said that we're friends, and we are friends. No, I really mean it. He has more integrity in his little finger than a significant portion of the world leaders and members of Congress, and I've been there for 8 presidents. This is a man of enormous integrity. And I know occasionally we're both referred to as old school, but we don't think there's anything old school about having mutual respect and actually being friends. Actually being friends. I come from a tradition, when I got elected as a 29-year-old kid to the Senate, where a lot of people that I served with, I disagreed with. But I learned a lesson from a man you knew as well, Jim. I learned a lesson from Majority Leader Mike Mansfield, a man of enormous integrity. He once said to me, he said, "It's always appropriate, Joe, to question another man or woman's judgment. It's never appropriate to question their motive, particularly when you know what they're made of. The one thing we've never done is question each other's motive." And he worked for a man who I have an enormous, not only respect for, but love for, George H.W. Bush. This is a fine, fine, fine man. As we used to say in the Senate, if you excuse a point of personal privilege, I was down in Houston not too many months ago, and I got a call from President Bush, from his office, asking whether I could meet with him. I said, of course I can. So I immediately called him my schedule and said, whatever the schedule is, we're going to change it so I can meet with President Bush. So I called back and said, when do you want me, at your home or your office? He said, no, I want to come to see you. I said, no, Mr. President. He'd just gotten out of the hospital. He was in a wheelchair. He said, I want to come to you. I said, no, Mr. President, that's not appropriate. Let me come to you. He said, no, I want to see you. I don't want to distract you. I want to see you. I'll meet you in your hotel. So I met him in what they call the hold room. He was in a wheelchair. And I said, Mr. President, what can I do for you? Whatever you need, I'm here at your disposal. He said, no, Joe, I just came to welcome you to Houston. That was it. He didn't want a single thing. He wasn't asking me to consider anything. He just wanted to welcome me to Houston. You know, that's the stuff that our system used to be made of, and will be again. You know, I also had an incredible opportunity that, again, I wish I'd never had, Jill and I, of getting to meet some extraordinary people at MD Anderson. A man who's become part of our family, who was our son's neurological oncologist, Dr. Al Young, who I spoke to yesterday, he's down in Australia putting together a program. It's called Dealing with Glioblastoma. He's one of my closest friends in life now. And one of the greatest neurosurgeons in the world, and it's not hyperbole, one of the greatest neurosurgeons in the world, Dr. Sawaya, who took care of my son, Bo. And with us here, and I just had a chance to have lunch with as well, is a man who runs and pilots that great cancer hospital, Dr. DePino. And it's good to see you, Doctor, and thank you for all you did for our Bo, and thank you what you did for my family over that year period. And it would be inappropriate but also, Doctor, please, and I mean this sincerely, if any of this is televised, I hope it gets carried. Thank the nurses for us. The nurses. If there are any angels in heaven, they're all nurses, male and female. The way they cared for not only for Bo, the way they cared for my son and daughter who were grieving and in pain, the way they cared for Bo's children, the way they cared for Jill and me. Some of them actually flew all the way up to Wilmington, Delaware, waited 5 hours in line. 5 hours. Because there were thousands upon thousands of people of Bo's viewing, just to pay their respects. We can never repay them. And what they did most of all, and any of you who have been through serious illness know, they gave us hope. They gave us hope. And let me tell you, as many of you know better than I, it matters. It matters. And Mr. Secretary, as I said, it's an honor. It's an honor to be with you. Perhaps we can bring back some of what we used to experience back to Washington. I really mean it's going to come back. It has to. We have to change the swing of this pendulum in both parties. In both parties, for the sake of the country. But Jim, I can tell you there still is one bipartisan consensus in Washington, and I mean this sincerely, the only one. It's the moonshot. As many leading Republicans are enthusiastically supporting this effort as are Democrats. It's the only subject. I get credit for getting it all along with an awful lot of folks in the House and the Senate. I have great respect and reverence for the place. But it's not because of me. It's because, as Jill said, everybody's been touched in some way. Profoundly like you and me and others here, but everybody's been touched in some way. And it didn't surprise me, Jim, when we first brought Bo to MD, the enormous respect, because they knew I was a vice president. First question I get asked, or almost first question, do you know the secretary? Do you know he's the guy that, and they used to use the phrase, founded this place. You've told me the story that it was, your dad gave it to Rice, MD used it, and then sold it to them. But I just want you to know, over there, they give your dad credit and you credit for the whole deal. You and your family, Jim, have done so much for this incredible institution. It's not hyperbole to suggest that Rice University is truly one of the great universities in the world. You know the greatest advantage we have? No, it really is. It really is. Everybody talks about how America's coming back and so on and so forth, and it is. But it's not because of Barack and Joe Biden. It's because we have a secret weapon, and I mean it sincerely. The single most underestimated president in American history, in my view, is Dwight D. Eisenhower. I am a great fan of Eisenhower's. And when Sputnik occurred, There were the wise men, they called it at the time, a wise men group put together as to how we should deal with the emergence of the apparent superiority in sciences and space that the Russians were demonstrating. And one of the recommendations was that we make massive investments in research and development at the federal level. That was a recommendation. General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower said, no, we will do that at the federal level with DARPA and ARPA and Defense Department, et cetera, but we should invest in our universities, our research universities. We have more great research universities in America, and this is not hyperbole, than all the rest of the world combined. That's what drives the innovative genius of this country. That, and I might add, and that's going to sound like a political comment, it's not, that and immigration are the two things that drive this for us. And so, folks, and I don't mean it as a political statement, but you students, when you leave here with a Rice diploma, it is noticed, it is respected, not only here, but around the world. So, Mr. President, you and your colleagues are doing a heck of a job, but it's been going on for a while down here. And I compliment you all. The Secretary mentioned that almost 54 years ago, almost to this day, President John F. Kennedy spoke here at Rice about another moonshot. And I want to read you what he said. He said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade, and we do the other things not because they're easy, but because they're hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energy and skills, because that challenge is one they're willing to accept and we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and all the others too." That's where we are today in the Cancer Moonshot. And by the way, there are great hospitals like MD that already have a moonshot that they have underway. But when President Nixon declared the war on cancer in 1971, the nation had no army, no weapons, no strategy for defeating cancer. When Bo was diagnosed at MD with stage 4 glioblastoma, we knew it was a death sentence. We understood the percentages, so did he. But like any father or mother, we attempted to learn as much as we could about not only his particular cancer, but about any and all research that might help with our brave Bo's fight for his life. And what I learned was that after decades of funding research, training scientists and doctors, treating millions of patients, investing in new genomic and information technology, that today's improvements to our clinical trial system, we finally had an army for the first time. We're at an inflection point. 5 years ago, oncologists weren't routinely working with immunologists. Immunology was that science out there that had come around at the turn of the century in the 1900s, but was not considered a particularly respected field. Virologists were not really in the game 6, 7, 8 years ago. Geneticists, chemical engineers, so many others were not working together. And what I learned was, today the combination of the science and technology puts us at an inflection point, gives us possibilities that with all the good intentions President Nixon had, for the first time, made possible some significant change. in the dreaded disease. Today, we recognize that the aggregating of shared data of millions of patients, genomics, family histories, lifestyles, treatment outcomes, can give us insights and patterns that could never, we have the capacity today to do 1,000,000,000 billion calculations per second. As Jim knows, the Department of Energy is on the verge of 1,000,000,000 calculations per second. We'll be able to do, Doctor, what you and the brightest people in all the world could take 2 decades to have to do in a matter of seconds by recognizing patterns. Why does one drug work on your cancer? You have the same cancer, it doesn't work on you, and it partially works on you. Why? We have the technological capability to do things we never had even 5 years ago. Because of these technological advances in analyzing cancer genomes and other genes in the body, we're closer than ever to understanding what is the holy grail, the cause of cancer. What keeps one cell turned on and another turned off? In a sense, it's pretty basic stuff. If you think about it, if you're trying to explain to your child what cancer is. We found out. I didn't know until my beau was stricken. There are over 208 distinct forms of cancer. The difference between going to the moon, there's one moon. No, I really mean this. It is more complicated what we are doing today. Over 200 distinct cancers, most of which are not susceptible to the same drugs or treatment or immunotherapy. A few years ago, it took more than a decade and $2.7 billion to sequence the first human genome. Now it takes less than a day, and it costs under $1,000. The cost is being driven down exponentially. New technologies, new therapies, new immunology that can target cancer cells, do less damage to healthy cells, transform the many kinds of cancer we have into chronic or manageable diseases, where 10 years ago they were an absolute death sentence. Folks, we have the weapons, but we need more coordination. We have to change a number of things to take advantage of where we are. This doesn't always make me popular with the docs. This doesn't always make me popular with the great cancer research centers, and I've visited the majority of them now, over 12 here and around the world. You docs think differently than astronomers or other scientists. You get a grant from NASA to study the 7th ring of Saturn. Whatever you find, you have to instantaneously share with the rest of the world. Instantaneously. You guys find something, you can keep it hidden behind a publication for over a year. You're not required to publish it all. Information is access. Not only are there new weapons and new soldiers, there's a new sense of urgency. That's the thing that amazed me. Like Jim as Secretary of State, he did more than I do, but when the president said, now, if you'd rather be Secretary of State, tell me, Jill said, no, we'd rather you, I know you'd rather be Secretary of State, Joe, but be Vice President is better for the family, meaning I wouldn't travel as much. 1,300,000 miles so far, Jim, and you know how they keep tab on my travels, right? But there's a sense of urgency. It's around the world. I don't know how I can't, it's impossible to exaggerate how much has changed in the last 5 years, not because of me or anything. So President Kennedy's words are still ringing in my ear. We are unwilling to postpone. We are unwilling to postpone for a minute, a day, a week, a month. Every great doctor in here can tell you, I guarantee you he's been asked by a patient, Doc, can you give me just one more week so I can walk her down the aisle? Doc, my first grandbaby's coming. I need 3 months, Doc. Just give me 3 months. This is about today. This is not about tomorrow. And so, as we take a look at this, as I said, this inflection point we find ourselves in, there is this recognition that the aggregation of data from millions of patients and their genomics, their family history, their lifestyles, their treatment outcomes, now all have the capacity to be analyzed simultaneously by these supercomputers. We can find new patterns, no guarantees. We can find new patterns, just like astronomers look at the stars and they look at patterns and what's changing in the sky, if anything. Because of technological advances in analyzing cancer genes and other genes, we're closer than ever before to understanding the cause of cancer in the first place and how to attack particular cancers. Look, the fact is that there are 14 million new cancer cases and 8.2 million cancer-related deaths worldwide per year. By 2025, if the status quo ante pertains, there will be 20 million new cancer cases per year, and 11.4 million more people will die from cancer per year. That's why, as Jill said, when we decided not to run, walked out in the Rose Garden with the president, it wasn't even planned as part of my notes, but I did say, because the president asked me on the way out, do you have any regrets? I said, I have one. I would have liked to be the president to preside over the end of cancer as we know it, not the end of all cancer, the end of cancer as we know it, because I think it's possible. When I said that one short sentence, it set off a firestorm. It stunned me, the instantaneous response from not only home, but around the world. In case you wonder why I always look like a deer in the headlights when the president's doing the State of the Union, every year he turns around and says, Joe will do it. He points to something, you know? He didn't tell me he was going to say, Joe will run this moonshot. He didn't tell me he was going to give me authority over every federal agency that has anything to do with cancer. The great part, Jim, of working with this guy is he gives me authority and that's it. I don't have to check back in, for real. For real. Every doctor in NIH went, oh my God, Biden's now in charge. But look, my impatience is born out of my experience and the experience of any of you who've been through all of this. I have no greater respect for profession than those folks who've devoted themselves, like Dr. DePino, to the cures for cancer. I really mean it. You're among the brightest, most principled people in our society. But we've got to change some of the way we do business here. We've got to break down some of the silos. That's why we created the Cancer Moonshot Task Force, to marshal the full force of the federal government. And the commitment I made to the private sector is, I promise you I will eliminate any roadblock that exists in the federal system. As you make me aware of it, I promise you I will do that. And the one thing, it's neither good nor bad, nobody in the federal government thinks that I won't do it. No, that's not, it's not like a threat, it's just it's like Jim, I mean, he had to run the most complicated and stilted department in all of the government, with the brightest people in the government, the State Department. The bureaucracy is necessary, but sometimes it has calluses. And we are committed to do whatever is needed to streamline the federal end of this. And we know this is not a federal solution, but we also know if we do our part well and better, we can have some positive impact. So I decided and went to the president and said, the effort, if you ask me to run it, will be guided from my perspective by 4 basic missions, key missions. 1, accelerate the understanding of what cancer is. Early detection, treatment, cures. 2, improve patient access to care. 3, identify regulatory barriers that exist at the federal level that stand in the way of improving research and care. And 4, provide greater access to research and to the data. We also created a blue ribbon panel made up of the leading outside experts, some from MD and many other places, from a broad range of disciplines: biology, immunology, genomics, diagnostics, biopharmacs, cancer prevention, treatment, investigators with experience in clinical trials, reducing health disparities, representatives from cancer advocacy groups, pharmaceutical and biological and biotechnological companies, mechanical engineers. You'd be amazed the array of talent necessary to tackle this problem. And out of all of this, a few top issues from this blue ribbon panel have emerged that must be dealt with to meet our goal, in our opinion. Notably, the lack of coordination and the failure to share information quickly. An antiquated culture of research funding. You can be one of the brightest 29-year-old, 30-year-old students unless you're associated with someone who is already incredibly well known, part of a laboratory that's already established. You will not get funded. And it will take you years to get funded. The greater need to bring new prevention strategies and diagnostics to and for patients. The need to reduce unnecessary regulatory burdens to accelerate getting treatment to patients. For example, until recently, the docs at MD knew that sometimes taking 2 immunotherapies, 2 drugs from 2 different companies, in combination may achieve a totally different result. But it took a long time. The FDA and other outfits weren't particularly helpful. Not now. Not now. As a result, the Cancer Moonshot Task Force and my office are working to break down these silos and cancer research along the entire treatment ecosystem. Earlier this year, we hosted a Cancer Moonshot at Howard University in Washington, D.C. For the first time ever, leaders representing the entire cancer community and beyond, oncologists, care providers, researchers, leaders in data and technology, philanthropists, advocates, patients, and survivors, they all came together to identify ways to double the rate of progress. At this summit, which served as a pivot for from listening to action, we announced there were over 7,000 people involved, every single state in the union. There was a consensus around 38 new actions and collaborations we announced just a month ago. There's so much more to come. We'll be issuing a new report with additional efforts that will do everything from changing incentive structures to encouraging team science and cross-discipline and cross-sector research and collaboration, speeding up the dissemination of cancer center knowledge to community practitioners to address the disparities in cancer care. If you're lucky enough to be able to have access to Anderson, your chances are exponentially better. If you live in some very rural area, part of the world, not near a great cancer hospital, it's a totally different prospect for you with the same exact cancer, with the same exact chances. But there are a few examples of what we're doing right now I'd like to mention. the National Institute of Health launched a new partnership bringing together 12 biopharmaceutical companies, research foundations, and philanthropists to invest together to fund research, share data, and accelerating bringing new therapies to patients. We set up a thing called OPEN, O-P, small case E-N, the Oncology Precision Network. That's a partnership between the Intermountain Healthcare, Stanford Cancer Center Institute, Providence Health and Services, Catholic Health Initiative, the Henry Ford Health System, and Synapse. This network will link the genomic data from 79 hospitals, 800 clinics, in 11 states. Data from more than 50,000 new cancer patients per year that can now be shared openly on a network, available in any research. The Department of Energy and Veterans Affairs. We formed a new collaboration to apply the most powerful computational assets at the national labs to over 500,000 veterans' records from one of the world's largest research cohorts, the Million Veteran Program, the cornerstone of the President's Precision Medicine Initiative. Mr. Secretary, it won't surprise you, but the world is rallying around this effort as well, virtually without exception. I've traveled on behalf of the President to meet an awful lot of heads of state. Every single meeting since the moonshot has been announced, I've been asked by the head at UAE, Israel, Japan, China, can we work with you? Can we sign an MOU with you? Because they know we are the epicenter of science and technology. They want to support it. Those sentiments were echoed at the Nuclear Security Summit. We had 50 of the world leaders on nuclear security and nonproliferation in the East Room. I sat at one end, the President sat in front of the fireplace, I sat in the middle of these tables in a big rectangle at the hallway you see where the President walks in to do his press conferences. And the President had to say before we began, you all get a chance to talk to Joe about the moonshot, but I'm not joking. But let's talk about nuclear proliferation first. I went to an international summit on regenerative medicine at the Vatican, where His Holiness Pope Francis asked me to deliver a keynote address. When I keynoted at Davos with over 2,600 world leaders, I was supposed to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, which I did, but they said, before you do, can you convene a cancer panel? Over 80 heads of state showed up to listen, not to me, but to the panel. The world's watching, and we're the United States. And as a result, as we speak, we're forming a number of international agreements. I was just in Australia. This summer, we signed 3 memorandums of understanding establishing a project to share genomic and protein data on at least 59,000 patients from the 2 countries, as well as 2 agreements with the Australian state government, providing a formal platform to further exchange collaboration. We're in the process of formalizing MOUs with a number of nations, from Europe to the Middle East to Asia, which is something I'll be taking part in the New York United States General Assembly meeting. Jim, I have 6 so-called bilats on MOUs with the heads of state of 6 different countries. Look, there's a building sense of urgency among nations and between governments and the private sector to truly drive changes across cancer. And today I'm proud to announce a major improvement we're making to our clinical trial system. Every day, thousands of Americans hear that dreaded word, that C word. And there's a fear and a numbness that sets in immediately. And what happens next can make a difference between life and death. If there's treatment there that can help, there's hope. But for some people, hope is a clinical trial that will ultimately determine whether or not a new therapy can slow or cure their cancer. But clinical trials, they're essential for developing new and more effective cancer diagnostic and treatments. But every cancer treatment used today required a clinical trial in order to get approved in the first place. But right now, less than 5% of the cancer patients in America are able to enroll in clinical trials, often because patients and doctors don't know where those trials are and what's available. You know, they don't think they need one. And if they do, they don't know where to go. They don't know who to ask. And even their doctors don't know where to go. Even if you want to be in a trial and your doctor wants you to be in a trial, it's really hard. Not all trials are listed. Not all trials are appropriate for diagnosis. You have to go through a real and cumbersome, complicated search to find the information. We know we can do better, and we're about to. Today, I'm announcing a significant new step to help cancer patients and their doctors search and find the right clinical trials for them. It starts by making information easily accessible. You can go to a website now that's supposedly going to tell you where clinical trials are. Try it. Every day, we search through complex information without even thinking about it. We book airline tickets, rental cars, hotels, rooms. We buy tickets for movies and concerts in a matter of minutes online. With that in mind, we ask our country's Presidential Innovation Fellows. The president had a great idea, Jimmy brought in some of the leading minds from Silicon Valley and said, come into the White House. We can't pay you much, but work here to help us modernize and bring into the digital age government and much else. These are some of the brightest technology minds in the world. And we asked them to partner with the National Cancer Institute to design a new patient-friendly search system for clinical trials that would be easy to use, as a travel site is. The result is trials.cancer.gov. It contains detailed information on the thousands of cancer trials going on. You only have to type in real words. You can type in breast cancer, leukemia, which you can't do today. Type in your zip, your age, and you'll find a list of all the clinical trials that could be right for you or your loved one. As part of today's announcement, the National Institute of Health is committing to mobilize this database of 200,000 clinical trials for all sorts of diseases across 50 states and 192 countries. We're making information readable and easy to access so patients, regardless of their disease, can find clinical trial research. But that's not all we're doing. We're taking two big steps that are going to be somewhat controversial, but are very important to accessibility and quality of trials. First, right now, only certain clinical trials with FDA-approved drugs, already approved, are required to be reported to the government so we can list them. So if you're a patient in a clinical trial with an experimental drug, but it fails, or you've had bad side effects, or it succeeds and you get better, that information is not recorded with the government or shared with other researchers, unless it's published in a journal, which usually takes more than a year to occur. In my humble opinion, it doesn't make any sense. We risk duplicating failed trials and patients not knowing about the successful ones, and we lose time. So we're changing that with the steps we're taking today through the National Institute of Health and the Food and Drug Administration. All trials have to be recorded, even with experimental drugs. By tapping into all kinds of clinical data, we can minimize the number of participants needed for new trials. We can speed up the time it takes to start a new study. We can keep the ability to get meaningful results. And right now, many clinical trials exclude people who have more than one disease, who have been treated for something before. But that doesn't represent most of the people who get cancer in our population. Think about it. If you're born with asthma, and you've taken medicine your whole life for asthma, and then you're diagnosed with breast cancer in your 40s, you don't qualify for a trial. Because understandably, clinicians want a pure subject. The only thing that they want to do in the clinical trial is get people with a particular disease. Researchers and research system, we have to change the incentives. Understandably, they prefer cancer with only one condition. But that's not right. So today, the FDA is encouraging researchers to expand the eligibility criteria for clinical trials so we can enroll a more diverse group of patients representing the patient base that's out there. We know, and we made it clear, we won't hold it against researchers and drug companies if the people with more than one disease do worse than others in the study. But we want information. We need it now. And finally, we're taking a big step to honor the obligation we have to patients who enroll in clinical trials. If you enroll in a clinical trial for yourself, it's also for the greater good. Right now, there's a rule in the books that requires researchers and drug companies to actually report the findings of their trials, whether they were successful or a failure. But most of you don't report. They don't want to admit failure, which is understandable. They don't want to give advantage to competitors if they had success. And some just don't think it matters much. But it does matter. We owe it to every patient who's in a clinical trial to make sure what we learn from their experience, for their sake and the sake of others, is available to everybody. That's why the Department of Health and Human Services, and my encouragement, is announcing a new rule to make sure that all information about clinical trials, good and bad, is shared with the public. And there are going to be real penalties for failing to report shared information, like a $10,000 per day fine and the possibility of losing your funding. This is not meant to be punitive. It's meant to prod the behavior that is already on the books required. Folks, more access to data means more research to make new discoveries faster. Patients and doctors can make informed decisions more rapidly about participating in trials. It matters. It matters. As President Kennedy said, this is a challenge we're unwilling to postpone. Let me close with this. I say to you students, I can imagine the day when your children will show up for their preschool physical, this is not hyperbole, and not only get inoculated for measles, but inoculations for many forms of cancer that they'll never get. We can already do that with cervical cancer, with HPV vaccine. Go home and tell your parents, have all your little brothers and sisters, it's not about transmittable disease. It's about curing, preventing cervical cancer. We can do it now with a single vaccination. I can imagine the day it's not a pipe dream, when the most vicious cancers are turned into chronic conditions. Look, we're in the cusp of phenomenal breakthroughs that can get us there. And the goal of the moonshot is to propel us forward. It's that basic. Supporters and skeptics alike ask us, what's the moonshot? Well, it's all about all of you, and as Jill said, doing everything you can to help prevent, detect, and treat cancers. By the way, if we just focused on prevention, we could cure over 60% of the cancer cases out there. Just prevention. It's everyone who spends sleepless nights and weekends in their laboratories looking for the next breakthrough. It's the patient who's being treated for their cancer, hoping they can return to their lives and their families. It's the parents starting foundations and companies to develop cures for children. It's organizations as big as NIH and the Department of Energy, as small as Alex's lemonade stand, trying to understand cancer and help patients defeat it. It's a Congress stepping up, which they're going to do with a massive increase in cancer research funding. Look, we're carrying the hopes and dreams of millions of people all around the world who are praying that we succeed. Not someday, but really soon. And for me and Jill, I have to acknowledge, part of the moonshot is honoring the way our Beau lived his life with courage, never giving up hope. But it's not just about my Beau. It's about every single solitary person. As Jill said, it's about us all. It's about not giving up hope, not getting over the fight, because there are breakthroughs that are just beyond our grasp. And we need each and every one of you, especially all of you students here today. Just like President Kennedy challenges the moonshot, I challenge all of you to think anew about what's possible. One of the reasons I picked the cancer, not just because of Beau. You know, it used to be when I was growing up, and I'm aging myself now, but really and truly, the one thing the American public believed, that there wasn't a single solitary thing America couldn't do if it put a mind to it. There wasn't a single solitary thing that we couldn't do. before you're out there in your jobs for more than a decade, you're going to be able to travel 22,000 miles an hour subsonic on an airplane. You're going to see such enormous changes that will blow your mind. You're going to see in the next 10 years more progress than occurred in the last 40 years. My generation saw more progress than happened in the previous 100 years. Remember, I know this sounds like chauvinism, but this is America. This is America. There's nothing we can't do. This is all within our grasp. We can end the scourge of cancer as we know it. But I tell you what, we got a lot more work to do, and we have to change the culture slightly about how we go about doing it. But the bad news for you all is, if my candidate wins, I'm going to still be doing this for her for the next 4 years, so I'm not going anywhere. Thank you all very, very much.